So then they were like, okay, well, what do you want to do? I was like, well, I think I want to start a consulting business, or I want to start consulting because I think that will meet my financial goals, and then maybe it'll take me somewhere else in my career in the future. But here was the best thing that ever happened to me. They said, you can start your consulting business while you're still employed here. So I gave them an 8-month notice period. And I will tell you, that 8 months was the best experience I ever had at that organization, because I started a shared services business. I created a budget. I hired 2 people. It's like I started a business with them, for them, and then that skyrocketed my career. There was a period of my life where I was completely just like, I'm good. You don't need to tell me anything. I know everything. The moment that I just let that go, that was when it felt like my career launched. The moment that I realized I didn't know everything. There is a continuous learning attitude that a consultant must have, or I would think anybody, if they're looking to have any kind of career, continuous learning in all areas of your life is mandatory.
Hi, I'm your host Chris Matthews, and you're listening to the Mentor Collective podcast. Conversations that resonate, stories that inspire. In each episode, I'm joined by a guest. We explore their personal stories, the challenges and triumphs which have shaped them, and the invaluable lessons learned along the way. Join us as we navigate through 4 key themes: career journey and reflections, personal and holistic approach, leadership and values, and finally, mentorship, guiding and being guided. In each theme, we traverse the past, present, and future, unraveling the unique narratives of our guests. Welcome to the Mentor Collective podcast. Thank you so much, Leanne, for coming on the podcast, on the Mentor Collective podcast.
Thank you, Chris.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm so pleased to have you. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, please.
Sure. So by my profession is I'm a solution architect for Salesforce. I've been working with CRM systems my whole life. So I would call myself a systems consultant for customer relationship management. I've had this recent existential who am I thing over the last year, I would say, and have been trying to not lead with my profession, but I am a mom, I am a spouse, I am a sister, a daughter, a friend, I am a doggy aunt, and I am a stepmom. And I've recently started to explore other things I enjoy in life. And one of the things that I've started to really enjoy is coaching and leadership development and high performance meditation, yoga, and flow. And I started to incorporate some of those things into my career. And I'm starting to think about what a new evolution could look like for myself. But short answer, I am a solution architect specializing in Salesforce, particularly in the service space, and even more particularly in the field service space. I love it. I'm a junkie. I love talking to companies about what they're working on and how they're looking to transform their business, and seeing the end users use the tool that we created for them, and they say, okay, this is a lot better than I thought it was going to be, and they're like, oh, this is going to make my life way better. That's the stuff that lights me up. And yeah, so seeking more of those experiences.
Thank you very much. Wow. Yeah, let's see if we can try and fold in all of those elements of your life into this, like this recording. Let's see if we can do it. I guess as you have done a little bit of reflecting over the weekend, I wonder if any of those things that you've just spoken about, what of those things kind of has meant the most to you when you think about fulfillment and what fulfills you? Yeah.
So the one thing that I keep asking the universe for is peace of mind and heart. And if I bring that energy and vibe into everything that I do, to me, I think that that's true luxury. Just not having to worry about anything, not having to stress about anything, knowing that everything's going to work out, knowing that we're all going to come together and we're going to figure things out together. That's to me the one thing that I truly pursue. in life these days.
And I know we're only seconds in, but I would love to just dive into it because it's fresh. Mm-hmm. I guess for you, I try in this podcast to not have like, what are the steps or what are the ingredients or what are this or that, because it sounds a little bit too prescriptive. But when you say peace of mind, even just talking about it makes me feel relaxed, because you're also right? Like everything will be fine in the end for most parts of our life. There's kind of two parts of it, right? There's one part of it where you've identified it as something which is meaningful to you and a goal. And then there's another part of it, which is what do you do proactively to get there, both internally for yourself, but then also with the teams that you work with, because I don't think we need to underbake you in Salesforce. You're a big deal. You're a big deal in field service. You've got a lot of experience behind you, and you're a very well respected person. So whilst you might not be the leader of X, Y, Z companies and all that kind of stuff, you're certainly a thought leader. So with that comes an element of mentorship, whether you intend to or not. So I wonder, for yourself, how do you pursue that peace of mind? And then when you're working with other people, how do you kind of encourage that?
Yeah, great question. It takes years, I think, of just committed practice, right? This is how I want to show up in every situation. So I have to remember to be that myself. So as long as I keep coming back to the centering thought of peace of mind and heart, what does that mean, right? So even as I say it, I'm taking a deep breath. So as simple as taking a deep breath, letting whatever situation that's happening unfold in front of you so you can observe what is actually happening. And then the best response will reveal itself. So there's a lot of patience, a lot of, okay, just take a beat. I need a minute. A lot of these pauses, intentional pauses that you take in order to come back to, okay, here I am in this moment. Take a breath. What's happening in this moment? Just observe, right? So there's a lot of that meditative component in every single phase. And when you incorporate that in consulting, holy smokes, you know how hard that is. You get put in these scenarios where you're in front of a customer or a client, even an end user, and they're asking, why isn't it behaving this way? I thought it would do this, but it's not. Like, you said it could do this. And it brings this element of, okay, this person's mad at me. I don't want, it starts triggering certain feelings that I'm looking to overcome, like people pleasing and, wanting to be perfect and, wanting to make sure that my value is being, worthiness is the bottom line of that one. And just keep coming back. Okay, take a breath. It's going to be okay. We're going to get to the heart of it. Listen to what this person's saying, right? Like there's a lot of daily in the moment practices that one must do. And then when you circle back to at the beginning of the day, at the beginning of the week, at the beginning of the month, right? How do you structure your days and how do you structure your weeks and your months so that when you are in the moment with that person, there aren't all of these notifications that are coming in distracting you from what is happening in this moment. So to me, that's part of peace of mind too, where if I've got an appointment blocked in my calendar, that's the thing that I'm doing for that period of time. My phone has like an emergency thing that'll go on if my kid is messaging me, right? I will get squirreled from time to time. But yeah, like just having these very structured blocks in the day and then letting other people know in the household, like, I'm on a call, doors closed. This is what it means. If you need me and it's an emergency, text me. They know that the ringer is off, but I'll see the message. But that's those little kind of practices. You just have to keep coming back to it and be truly committed to it. And then eventually it just starts being part of your day-to-day. I mean, you have slips, but you can easily come back to it because it just becomes ingrained in who you are.
So great. And what you're talking about is almost to the definition, to the word, is a mantra, right? This thing that you say or repeat to yourself in those moments or in any moment. And there was one thing I found out recently about mantras is about, especially ones that are to do with calming, is to say them when you're calm as well as when you're not calm, so that it kind of grounds you in the calm moment. So it's almost important to this assumptive world that I'm walking into with you, and your world of Leanne, the importance of saying, peace of mind and heart when you're in those relaxed moments would so much easier bring you back to those moments when you're in the high pressure situation. Because like you, I work in field service, and I'm a consultant. I've been for most of my life, and I completely appreciate when sometimes you're in a highly pressurized situation, for you to respond in a productive way. It's difficult to remember that. And I guess and so thank you for sharing what you do and what you think. I guess the other part of the question was also, how do you influence the people around you to do that?
Right.
Did you have something about that?
Yeah, that's a good one. Sometimes it can even just be as simple as just inviting them to take a breath. So sometimes it's in the moment while a meltdown or a breakdown is happening. I find that those are the moments where it's like, okay, this is the time where someone really needs to feel supported and heard, and then reminded that there is another approach to take without causing them to escalate even further. So I do find that, like, in the moment, it's just, okay, I am here to listen to you, and I want to get to the bottom of this, acknowledging, like, it sounds like this is really important to you. Let's take a breath, and let's start from the beginning. What's the purpose? What are we really trying to accomplish here? And I'd like to pull people back up to the, wait, why are we really here conversation? And if we keep thinking about what's really important here, then it tends to... I spoke recently with somebody in an Uber, and he was an industrial psychologist consultant. He has a PhD in it, and I was like, this is the best Uber drive I've had in the longest time. He was telling me when he was talking to people, management, it was like, in the 70s and 80s, he's like, back in the day, they was so contentious. It's like management versus employees, and they were always fighting, and like the uprising of unions and things like that. So he's like, you have to find a common enemy, and I was like, I'm not really a fighting person, so I don't want to call it an enemy. It's like, whatever you want to call it, a common thing you want to accomplish. And as long as you find that common ground, you end up becoming on the same team. And then the reason why accomplishing productivity, or the reason why accomplishing quality, or, increasing revenue, like, you make that KPI or that metric or whatever the ultimate goal is, you make that the common result. Okay, so how could we make a decision that would support that behavior or that outcome? So whether I'm mentoring in a Salesforce consulting project, or if I'm mentoring someone just generally coaching in life, we have the same kind of conversations too, where it's like, what's the one thing that you really need so that you could just be free of the worry, free of the fear? What could you create as a result of that? Because that worry and fear take up so much space. So we just tend to think of, like, it's gonna be there. Just, we don't necessarily need to make it so big. So we need to make more space for creativity, for connection, for things that create fulfillment, as opposed to creating this despair and this dark cloud that will float over your head everywhere around you. So you won't necessarily get to where you're going if you're just digging in the trenches all the time, I would say. So yeah, I guess the advice that I usually give to people is to, come a little bit higher, come back to the purpose. Why are we here? What are we really trying to accomplish here? And then take that breath, and then come back to, okay, so in this moment, how are we going to take that fear and worry and turn it into creativity. And then from a bigger picture perspective, like how are you structuring your day to set yourself up properly so that you don't keep falling back into this kind of pattern?
The one thing that you got me thinking about was, and getting into the realms of conflict management, this one mentor that I had, I don't think they were a particularly good mentor, actually. Like 60% of what they did wasn't great, and I decided not to follow, which in some ways is mentorship anyway. But then in the 40% that they did do well, there was a moment where we were having, there was this one client and the conversation was getting really heated. And the project sponsor, who is people who aren't in the project world, is a very, very senior person on the project, pretty much is the person paying for the project, or is responsible for the payment of the project anyway. And they were really, really unhappy with what the project team had done. And they were getting more and more angry, more and more frustrated. You could hear it in the voice. And what the person on the effectively project sponsor on my side said, as soon as they had finished speaking, they said something along the lines of like, wow, I really hear you. I really feel for you. That sounds really frustrating. And kind of entering that emotional space is not something that I've seen that person do and doesn't do very frequently. So it was definitely a strategic play. I wonder, whilst we're in this realm of the conflict management piece, and thank you so much for elaborating on finding the common goal, or reminding people what that common goal is. Do you ever, in those situations, approach the emotions that are on the table, or do you mostly try and sort of just steer away from those and take a moment in like a practical sense?
Yeah, I tend to pivot depending on what the situation warrants, but I am typically a heart-led leader. So which means really embracing the conversations around emotions, and which really starts with, how am I feeling in this moment? Right? So what am I feeling? And one of the things that I learned when I was studying how to be a coach and I was training to be a coach was the concept of bringing what's in the room to the forefront. So the phrase is, use what's in the room. And that is actually really powerful, like you said, right? The acknowledgement of the emotion and what is happening right now is almost a breath of fresh air, because people tend to try to look past it or ignore it and just think that if they just ignore all of that and just use the logic side of, I guess, their brain there to solve the problem, they'll get to the root of the problem faster. But if you tend to address the emotional side of things and you clear space, there's so much more that can come through in a faster, more meaningful way. So just like, you can even feel like your body's like so tense, like nothing, like your blood is not even flowing. So it's just, if that is a good visualization for those visual learners out there, that's the way that I visualize it, right? So if I'm actually feeling my body just like, okay, I'm even like holding my breath and just like, I'm feeling tense, and okay, just soften what's happening here. And then say, I'm feeling really intense right now. How are you feeling right now? Do we need to take a minute? Sometimes there are some people who just say, do you want to just like get up and go for a walk? Like, we can have this conversation and we can just like go for a walk and just do a walk and talk. A lot of the times that can help too. It takes a lot of courage to shift the context from, wherever the space you're in, and try to shift it so that the energy changes to be more productive. I think that, a lot of people don't think that they've got the leadership or the authority to just tell whoever they're talking to, like, whoa, hold on, like, whatever we're doing right in this moment isn't really working. Might I make a suggestion and let's go for a walk so we can maybe unlock another part of our brain, something like that.
I loved you started off on an analogy about the body being tense and the blood, what your heart working harder to make the blood flow. And as you were, just before you had started that analogy, I was thinking about almost sometimes in a meeting, and I was thinking about it in plumbing, because I'm a bit of a squeamish person. I don't like blood and stuff, but I was thinking about it in the sense of like the pipes get kind of more and more clogged with that emotion, right? And then it does become harder to the water flows through faster or it stops flowing at all. And in the end, you've got to do something to address the pipe. And I really, really love what you say about the importance of unclogging that emotion, because it does, right? It completely clouds the topic, and which is why, from a practical measure, being able to say, okay, everyone, let's just take a step back. The cliched phrase, but it works, right? Let's take a step back and just think about, okay, what are we actually doing here? And do you need to? That's fabulous. Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about the first theme, which is career journey and reflections. How did your journey begin, and what led you to where you are today?
Sure. So my career that's actually a really good question, because what's interesting is we have a lot of jobs, and it's like, at what point did my career actually start? When things started to click, where my brand started to really dictate, right? Leanne is a Salesforce field service expert, right? Like, when did that land? And I think, if I think about it in phases, right? The jobs phase, where it's just like, I gotta just make some money. And then I think about it as okay, I might be onto something, and you're starting to formulate your craft. And then you get into I'm a master in my craft, and I would maybe say I've got a career now. I would probably put it into those three, I would call chapters maybe. And, work has always been part of my life growing up. So my first job, I think I might have been like 5 years old. My grandfather owned a hardware store somewhere downtown Toronto, downtown Weston area. And I would go to the hardware store and I would work with him. So the way that the store was set up, it was just like a long and narrow retail store with like a bunch of tools and nuts and bolts and stuff. And people would just come in through the front door. And my grandfather had like a stool, kind of like a perch, if you will. So he would always be able to greet the person coming into the door. And then the cash register was like right over there. And he would just sit on his perch all day. Well, when I was there, that was my perch. So I got to sit on the perch, and I got to be the one that got to greet customers. So I was the very first store welcomer was my very first job. And then at the end of my shift in quotes, I would sweep, and my grandfather would like throw coins on the ground, and he's like, whatever you find on the floor is yours to keep. So that's how I got paid, right? Like, I would find all these coins on the floor, and I would keep them. And then I remember sorting all of the nuts and bolts and making sure they were all organized. And they had like some jobs come in. Like I remember changing window screens. You know how like when you have a window pane and there's like a screen there so you can open the window but no bugs fly in?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm with you.
Right? So I knew how to replace one of those things like in my early years of life. So I think about that as my earliest work experience, right? From I'm watching my grandfather as an entrepreneur, as a storekeeper, right? Like talking to his customers who were pretty much his buddies. Like they would just basically come in and hang out, and I didn't know if they were buying anything or what, but they would leave with stuff and they would talk for a while. And so yeah, it was an interesting thing. So I had a preconceived notion of what work looked like at a very early age. And then growing up too, on my mom's side, like my mom was an SAP consultant, a former banker, and then transformed her career into an SAP consultant. So from an early age, I was in high school when I saw her do that career change. I thought, okay, so it's possible to change your careers too. So you can invent yourself. You can intentionally go out, learn a skill, learn it really well, become really good at what you do, and you can move from being a banker to an SAP implementer right at the height when SAP was all the rage. And I thought that was kind of cool. And then she would show me her paychecks and I'd be like, whoa, you got that much money? And she's a consultant. So I got this idea, again, another preconceived notion that your career is your destiny. If it's up to you and you can pretty much write your own paychecks. So I was pretty lucky growing up, I would say, to be exposed to all of this. I would say the third, I've got two more influences that I need to shape because my dad is an internal auditor and he worked for like the pipelines and he had a really big job. But then when my parents got divorced, he changed careers too, but decided to work at the government. He wanted something more stable and just a low-key kind of job so that he could always just be around for me and my sister whenever we needed him, which is a very interesting pivot, right? To see my mom move to be more career advancing and then my dad move to be more career stabilizing. So that was an interesting shift. And then when my dad remarried, he remarried a nurse. And she's a registered nurse, but she also had her own business of reflexology and foot care. So again, I've got this really wide range of various ways you can make money. And again, all of these people made very intentional choices in the work that they made or the work that they pursued, how they made their money, and then ultimately, what is it serving them, right? It wasn't just need to go out there and just make money, right? There was a higher purpose to the decision that they made for work. So from that would be the early phase. So I started at McDonald's and I worked all those restaurant jobs. And so the service industry always seemed to fascinate me. And then a few restaurants, but then my career didn't really take off until I would say it's my late 30s because I was working full-time. I had a young child. I had my child when I was 25. So when he was 5, that was about the age where I was like, okay, well, you're on your own-ish. Like you can walk around. You can open the cupboard and grab a snack. You can entertain yourself. So I think that was about the time where I was able to invest a little bit more time I got my project management certificate. I had to work 2 jobs to make ends meet too. So I was working 2 jobs and then studying for my project management certificate. I was a CRM administrator at an asset management company and also a marketing administrator and also quasi IT. So I had this really big job, but it just wasn't paying enough. And something happened. I don't know how I got a promotion, I guess. Like I was in the IT role and then they pulled me into the private equity fundraising group. And it came with a raise enough for me to quit that second job. And how old was I? I think I was 28, 29. And I would say that in that moment, that was when my brand spoke for me, where they said, okay, yeah, you're now ready for a job that is enough for you to support yourself and your family. I would call that was where my career was. I don't know. Like, how do you define like when your career started?
As a genuine question or as a...
Yeah, that's a genuine question. What defined, yes, I am officially in a career now for you versus just jobs trying to make it?
I think when I look back, it's about what is the most junior version of where I am now. Which is not to say that's right or wrong, but when I think, so what I do right now is a consulting project manager or program manager or whatever, and I'm in the sort of delivery space outside of that. And my first project management job is really where I think that's where where my behaviors now, I was influenced so strongly back then. You know, like I cast my mind back to my first job as a project manager, and it was a junior project manager, and I was super junior. That's what I think.
Okay. So then the very first full-time job that I got out after university, It was a lease administrator and tenant relations coordinator. So I worked for a real estate investment trust, and they gave me this dual role because just a lease administrator wasn't enough, and they needed a secretary plus someone to answer the phone if the light bulb was out in a building. So I was that person that would field calls and then dispatch those calls to technicians in buildings. So it started off in real estate. I had to do a lot of filing, but lease administration, tenant services, and then secretary. And then it turned into one of the tenants hired me to be a business analyst for their startup, which was kind of cool. So here I am at I think I was 23. Cool, I'm working at a startup. That sounds real fancy. I'm a business analyst. I have no idea what that means. I mean, I took one course in university on business systems analysis and design. It was all of that in one class. And I thought, okay, well, maybe this will be cool. And so that experience was really good. But then it went bankrupt and I found out I was pregnant the next day. Well, I kind of had a feeling all week, but ultimately that's the way that the timeline went. So I was so thankful actually that I didn't have to go into work with morning sickness. It worked out really well. And then I had to look for a job while I was pregnant, and that was kind of weird. So I felt that mixed emotion where it's oh no, my life is over, my career is over, I'm never gonna find a job. I gotta figure out how I'm gonna raise this child and have a career at the same time. But then I went to a temp agency because I couldn't find anything. So I went to a temp agency and they did all of the word processing, typing, and Excel tests. And I ended up scoring really well, almost perfect on the Excel thing. I was oh, I didn't know I was good in Excel. I think I picked that up from the lease administrator job. And then, because I remember I had to create reports. It was the very first time I ever used crystal reports. I did crystal reports of the number of light bulbs that were out and the number of heat complaints that we had, all of the complaints that we had in the building, so that we would have an idea of how to staff it. So that was kind of interesting. So as I reflect back and say it right now, maybe that was the origin. That job itself taught me so much. It planted so many seeds for me. So then I ended up getting a job at this asset management company implementing their CRM system. And I guess I liked it, right? They had a consultant come in to scrub databases and remove duplicates, and then it ended up creating more duplicates, and it was a disaster. So they were we're going to do this the old-fashioned way. We're going to hire a temp, and she's going to come in and scrub Excel spreadsheets. And I did it, and I would provide project status updates, and a few, maybe 2 or 3 months later, the woman I was reporting to, I would label as my first mentor. She's what are you doing for the rest of your life? Because, you've got a job here for life if you'd want it. We can put a job offer for you and just let me know what you think. I would love to, but I will need to take a bit of a break because I need to go have a baby, but I'll be right back. And she was holy smokes, you're pregnant? I didn't know I had to disclose that because the gig would have been done before I had the baby. But yeah, it was really funny. And she's okay, just stay with us forever. And I ended up working at that company for 11 years. And we implemented CRM systems throughout that whole time. So I was an administrator, so I would implement it and then administer it. And then I would go to another, it was a bigger company, so there was a head office. So then I would go to the head office, I would switch from that one group to the head office, and I implemented their CRM system and became their marketing administrator. So I picked up various roles within this organization, and needing a CRM system to manage all of our stuff right away. And for all of our tasks. So a CRM system was in my, career my whole life, right? So from 23 years old all the way up until, good Lord, 20 years later, this has been the thing that I did. And in the moment, you have no idea. You just think, I'm a database admin, or I'm just like answering phone calls and just logging my call into the computer. Like, you don't realize that that computer is feeding a database and that can generate reports for you. But yeah, I would say that would be that real estate investment trust as a lease administrator / tenant services coordinator / secretary would be, the thing that kicked off my career.
Wow. And then you kind of arrive to the present day where you've, I guess, been in numerous consultancies. Could you give us a snippet of that?
So then the career, I would call them the career launch then, right? So after 11 years of doing this work, I thought, I'm really good at what I do, right? People are seeking me out. I know what I'm talking about. There's now, by this point, moving from like the Maximizer CRM system to Microsoft Dynamics to Setuit, which is a proprietary niche private equity fundraising tool, to then Salesforce, right? I was managing a CRM system for 6 different business units all in one platform, and I made that happen. And I'm like, I think I might like this. I want to prioritize this as my career, and I want to launch my career here because I'm seeing the consultants come in, and I'm like, I know I can make more money doing the work that I'm doing for the exact same thing that I'm doing, but I'm not making that here. But the experience that I was getting at this organization was just like the autonomy that I had, the authority. Like, I had an amazing experience there. I just wasn't getting the pay. So I finally mustered up the courage to ask. And I said, I have ambitions of hitting this level in my career. What would my journey track be at this organization? And they actually, thankfully, told me there wouldn't be one for me. My skill set was not a core competency that is required of this organization. So it's not a role that they invest in. And that's when it was like, oh my gosh, that makes perfect sense, right? Like that whole concept of, that the cost of a water bottle is like free in some places, but then it's like $10 at a concert because you can't get it and there's like no way to get water. So I'm like, okay, so it's just the environment that I'm in that dictated my economic value. It had nothing to do with anything else. So I was like, thank goodness. So then they were like, okay, well, what do you want to do? I was like, well, I think I want to start a consulting business, or I want to start consulting because I think that will get me the financial goals, meet my financial goals, and then maybe it'll take me somewhere else in my career in the future. But definitely my number one thing is to meet financial goals. And so they said, okay, well, we wish you all the best, but here was the best thing that ever happened to me. They said, you can start your consulting business while you're still employed here. So I gave them an 8-month notice period.
Wow.
And I will tell you that 8 months was the best experience I ever had at that organization, because I started a shared services business. I created a budget. I hired 2 people. It's like I started a business with them, for them. And when they presented me the offer to be the manager of that group, I was like, thank you very much. Like, I really appreciate it. But maybe now's the time where I give you my official 2 weeks notice, because at the time I had a couple of clients already for Salesforce consulting, and I was able to do that in the evenings. And I was like, okay, I'm going to just take the leap. And then that skyrocketed my career. And then I ended up creating my own consulting business. I had 3 consultants working with me. I had a 4th woman who came on as a fractional chief operating officer for me. It was a really great 3 years. And then I got a request to become a product manager, success architect at Salesforce. So I did a 3-year stint at Salesforce. And I think that really skyrocketed my career, like, immensely. And then now here I am. I'm now at Rafter One Consulting, and with an incredible group of people. I did debate restarting my company after my stint at Salesforce was over, but there was something about being with a team of people who are just way smarter than you that I got blessed with when I was at Salesforce. And so now I have the same thing at Rafter One. And if I don't know something, I know someone who knows a lot about it. And I can just pull them into a call and they make us all look good. And we're just, yeah. So there was and now as I think about for my entrepreneurial itch, thinking about what I want to do. So I'll do a career pivot at some point. It's just, I'm really enjoying myself right now at this, I would call, pinnacle of Salesforce consulting, where my brand really is starting to speak for myself.
Wow. When I talk to people and we spend some time to think about where you came from or where you are now, suddenly there's this intense realization of, oh my gosh, the amount of experience that almost every person has had, drawing from so many different areas and walks of life, you know? I think it's almost worth most people just sort of sitting down for like 20 minutes and just thinking themselves through, what was my first job? What did I do there? Who did I talk with? What were my responsibilities? And yada, yada. And you sort of come through now. And I was transported as you were talking about time as a 5-year-old, as a store welcomer at your grandfather's shop, which was just lovely. I had like an animated, like a kind of the start of Up kind of moment, you know? Yes. I was like, Leanne as a 5-year-old sat there welcoming people in. But what have you, because obviously now you're a mother and your children are growing up now, right?
Yeah.
Have you had a moment where because that must have been so special, so special for your grandfather to have you there. But obviously for you as a child, you were just like, oh, I'm just going to go and do this thing and it's going to be fun. But as a parent myself with young children nearly the same age, and for you with a bit older children, have you had a moment as a parent where you think back to that and think, oh my gosh, that was so special and so meaningful?
Yeah, I definitely do. And like when I went through this exercise of doing like the origin story thing, like I do think, and I would recommend to people, like you say, like this, I'm so glad that you have this segment on your podcast, because I do feel like really reflecting on that origin story really does unlock those golden moments that were really special, right? And the more light you shine on those moments, the more there's something that just uplifts your human spirit, and you just move through the world a little bit differently, knowing that you had these moments of just joy, care, love, to be on the perch, like I felt special that like my grandfather like gave up his chair for me, and like of course everybody who came in would just be like, oh, who's this? You know what I mean? Like it would just gush over me, like of course, like that was so cool. And then my grandfather beaming, I'm sure, like just, yeah, it was absolutely such a special moment. Yeah, and again, in the moment, you don't really notice it. It's only on reflection. And I think about every single job that I have, and when I did my origin story, and I would invite people to explore this part too, it's not just what did I learn, what did I feel, like what was I doing, what was I struggling with, what did I want to do next. It's the who in that job helped you. At that real estate investment trust, there was a woman, and this is the thing that I regret the most. I cannot recall her name. While I was at that temping agency, I had a secretary moment so we've got the sports center, like the Sky Dome, which is now called the Rogers Center. So they have a organization that runs that operation. And so I temped there for a little while as their secretary or receptionist. I think they call it receptionist now. I would be the person that would welcome them in, and we would take calls for people who would want like a box office or like season tickets, or maybe there was a new vendor, a food vendor that wanted to come in. But she was the chief of human resources, and she, after we met, she moved to that real estate investment trust. Well, she called me and said, hey, I need a receptionist. Would you like a job? Right? Like, and again, 20 years later, when I'm doing this origin story exercise, that honestly, it took me a long time to do this origin story exercise. Like, it was just that enriching. And I'm like, I can't for the life of me remember. And honestly, like, I think, and so now it's a matter of, okay, I have to bless this woman. Like, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I had no idea. Like, at 21, you're like, you think you're just like, you think you're so cool, like, oh yeah, I got this because of me, like, has nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with this woman, like, being incredibly generous and just, yeah, like, so now it's a matter of, okay, so this was the type of person who inspired me, and now how do you pay that forward? How do you look at a 21-year-old or a 25-year-old or whatever it is, and how do you give them a chance?
I love that. I hope that there's a part of this podcast which is those individual experiences can inspire people to go off and have something similar, but also inspire them to think back as well. It's lovely to hear, and so much that you would have learned by doing the greeting, and would have been instilled in you, because I think for the moment, because we don't know each other, we've only just met because of the podcast, but there's already something about you which is so open and friendly, and I know maybe it's too, and maybe I'm analyzing this too much, but I compare your sitting on the stool to my uncle. For a period of time, his child must have been the same age and up. My uncle, if he was with his son, he would tell his son to call someone and ask them something and do something. So he'd be driving somewhere, he'd be like, "Oh, call my mum, for example. Call your auntie and ask him, what's for dinner and what blah blah blah, whatever." And he is now the most outgoing. He can talk to anyone. He's just incredible. And I'm sure, as well, for me, as my parenting journey as well, I've started to do similar things for the child that can speak, by asking her to step out, right? And I think the thing about you being on that stool and greeting people is so deeply ingrained now into you, the ability to, or that people are not something to be afraid of, and that, although obviously some people are, but for the most part, you don't need to start in that negative, shy space, and I think that's what a lovely learning to have attached to your grandfather.
From a parent's perspective, though, and creating intentional experiences for your child to, develop some social skills is, I would also, I kind of hope that I created some of those moments for my kid, but I definitely, when I start meeting other parents and talk to them about how they raise their children, and then a lot of my friends, their children are younger, and I'm seeing how they're raising their children, I'm like, that's smart. Like, I should have done that with my kid. Like, I wonder where he would be if I did that, And so there's definitely a lot of that, like, did I do enough? Like, I don't know. But there are some things that I do think about. When he was younger, I definitely remember more, I don't know, like, I wish that I could think about more glimmer moments, but like, I think about the moments where he and I fought. And I think about, like, mostly about homework, like, sit down and do your homework. Like, I'll give you, and then even bribing him, I'll give you chocolate chips for every, like, math question you do, right? Like, I just think, what was I thinking in that moment? When I reflect on that, it's like, I'm sure I could have done a better job in that particular experience. But then as I think about, like, the end result and where he's at right now, it's like, okay, well, that's one way of building resilience and just, like, I don't know. It's being more proactive and intentional about the skills that you develop in your children, I think is a really wonderful thing to think about. And I think it takes a network, right? Because I was so young, I didn't really have anybody. And then again, I think too, because I was so young, I had an arrogance about myself where it was like, I'm just going to go based off of my mother's intuition, and I'm not going to ask anybody. So there was a period of my life where I went through that, and I was completely just like, I'm good. You don't need to tell me anything. I know everything. And I think it was in about like the late 20s, like right in that moment where it was like, I feel, this is funny, an interesting correlation that's just occurring to me. The moment that I just let that go and just became more open and receptive to seeing what's really out there and more realistic instead of just staying in my bubble, that was when it felt like my career launched. The moment that I realized I didn't know everything. And then even my parenting style changed completely. It was just more like, okay, so now I'm more open to receiving feedback on, how to, have a better relationship with my child, or how to help him develop his own unique, authentic personality, right? There was, I would say.
Yeah, you're reminding me as well of, I overthink about every micro interaction forming, being like the butterfly's wings that started the tornado or the hurricane, whatever it is, somewhere else. And there was this one moment in my older child's life. She's 3.5. There's this series of moments where she sort of stopped responding to questions. And this was when she was like early 3-year-old. Whereas previously she would answer everything I said. And it got to a point where I was getting so frustrated. And what I was seeing was my daughter becoming so introverted that she was just not gonna, and then that's where my thoughts stopped. And it's only when I spoke to someone else and I was like, oh, she's just never answering her questions. And blah, blah, blah. And they were like, well, do you think that when she's 21, she won't answer people's questions? Or how do you think, and just that outside perspective and just I didn't find the realization like you did in that moment, but it came to me in a slightly different way. And there's so much to be said for, I think, like both in the career, but then also and as a leader and as someone who's not a leader yet, but then also as a parent and any kind of walk of life. These I don't know how you would describe them, but these moments that repeat themselves, or they feel like they're repeating themselves,
Yes.
And you see them in this way, which is very negative, and you sort of just get dragged down into this whirlpool, which actually doesn't need to be, like the homework thing. Yeah, that's important. But like, is it so important that, X number of years later, that's what you remember, And I had the same thing only a few months ago. And I think being able to, it sounds like you've already got some of that perspective, and I'm still looking for it for sure and looking to capture it,
Yeah. And you don't necessarily see the patterns until it happens a few times, right? But I remember even as a child going through similar exercises with my mom and fighting and begging her, like, I don't want to do this. I really don't want to do this. Can you stop? And then here I am recreating that for my child. And I didn't realize it. Honestly, I didn't realize it until he was 14. 14. That's a long time to live with a person who's like recreating like generational trauma almost. Like, I mean, I don't think it's that severe, but that's what it feels like right now in the moment looking back. But the moment that you flip it and the moment that you choose to do something different, that's where the magic is. And it's so hard to do something different because you don't know how. It's like your brain doesn't want to learn something new. So it'll just like make it uncomfortable to shift. As simple as just like having a conversation with my kid recently, like after our relationship was repaired. Because when he was 14, like we had a pretty bad blowout. And because I was awful. Like in hindsight, I was just like, you're in grade 9, you're failing math. Like, what does that mean? Like, what does that say about you? And like, you should listen to me because my job title is success architect. So like, I know what success looks like. So you better listen to me. Like, what kind of person does that? Like, right? And then, but like in the moment, you're going to be like, well, what else would you, like, that's exactly how, like, I was red, like, I was boiling mad. And he's like, I'm going to go live with my dad. I'm like, okay, fine, peace. And so 2 weeks later, I was like, that's stupid. Like, what the hell, Leanne? Like, who does that? So again, the whole thing about, okay, so I don't know everything. I screwed up here. Accepting that, already is to me, I think like the first thing about peace of mind, right? Like, yeah, sometimes you make a mistake. You have to take ownership for the results of your life because you made a decision that got you here. Yeah. So take ownership. Dr. Shefali is like a parenting psychiatrist or psychologist, and she had the trouble with teens or something like that, trouble with teens. And she goes, I was so mad. It was like a virtual, like a recorded training session. I was so mad at her. I'm like yelling at the recording because she said, you know what? Like the trouble with teens is not the teen, it's you. And I was like, excuse me?
How dare you?
Dare you? I'm a mom. Like I know everything. I'm a success architect. Like, come on.
Is that still, I'm with you. I'm completely with you.
Yeah. So you have to take like a big bite of humble pie every so often. Like, and so just like the moment that you do that, there's a level of respect that you get from the person. So I did this course, realized it's my fault. I realized how I created it. There were some things that I had to work on with my parents too. So had some like really great conversations with them. And you know, I don't know if you've been reading some of these things about like rebuilding your relationship with your parents as an adult, where it's like when you're a kid, your parents are like your superheroes. They're not really human beings. They're just these entities that come in and make sure you stay alive and thrive and just like, yeah, that's my dad. Like, that's my mom. They're just there. And then I don't know, at least for me, my experience, like you kind of take them for granted a little bit and you go through that phase of they're always going to be there because they're my parents. I don't have to worry about treating them nicely. Like, what do they care?
Right.
Right? Like, they're my parents. They're going to stick around forever.
They have no feelings. They are just practical. They are beings of existence.
They're just beings. Exactly. Right. They're not humans. And then all of a sudden you're like, so I did this course and I'm wondering why my kid is giving me such a hard time. And it's because I gave my parents such a hard time. And so what am I willing to do to repair the relationship and have an ideal parent-child relationship so I can demonstrate and model that to my child? Right? Like, I wonder what my child was seeing in order to treat me that way. In my head, right? It's like, I'm thinking, you're treating me poorly. You're talking back to me. You've got this attitude. When really, like, is he really giving me attitude? He's just talking like a teenager. Like, but I made it about me. And so anyway, so it was a really great exercise. Dr. Shefali, highly recommend it for parents. Like, even with young toddlers, she talks about like really understanding who they are and like really seeing their personality unfold. It's really fascinating.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, so then the conversation I had with my son was just like, listen, this is actually my fault and I really need to apologize. I'm not ready because I have some work to do before I think I'm going to be a good enough person for you to interact with. And I don't think you're ready either. So why don't we just like take a couple more weeks and then we'll see if we're in a better space to come back together. And he's like, yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, sure, that's a good sign. And then, then 2 weeks later, he's like, yeah, I'm ready. And then we had like, I don't know if you have bubble tea or what you call it over there, boba.
Oh yeah, bubble tea.
You call it bubble tea? Yeah, in the US they call it boba. So we had some bubble tea and like talked about it, and we've been good ever since. But having conversations with him that are from a real place, like here's what I'm feeling right now. Like he even now has conversations with me like, okay, so I don't think you're gonna like this, but I'm gonna just tell you anyways. I'm gonna drop this course, and like it doesn't really mean anything. And I'm like sitting here thinking, okay, well, what the hell is that gonna mean? You're dropping business as a course. Like I thought you would really love business. Business is awesome because I love business. And I was like. So it was funny because in that moment I was like, all right, I'm having some like biases pop up, Cruz. Like, just bear with me, honey. Like I am triggered all over the place. And he's just like, I thought you might because it's business and you would think that I would like it because you like it. And I'm like, okay, oh my God, we're having like a real conversation about like my known bias. And I'm like sitting here triggered in my own like fester, whatever. So it is interesting how like your leadership skills develop at home first. And I think that's where like part of the peace of mind comes in as well. Like peace of mind, like it's got to be in you. And then it's, if it's not in your direct circle in your home and you're not able to apply it in your home, the change that you're looking to create in yourself will never stick. Because these people are around you all the time. They're either going to say like, ew, like, who are you, this new person? Like, I don't like it. Go back to the way that you were, or I don't understand it. So no, like, and they resist it. But if you bring them along in your journey and just, just say like, hey, I'm working on something new. Like, I'm going to try something. Are you game? Right? Like, okay, sure. So, this is what I'm feeling right now. How are you feeling? Right?
What a great... I know the other thing is that it demonstrates that the fact that your son basically is a consultant already, right? He anticipated how his message might come across. He prepared set your expectation, and then when you were in it and you were blowing up, he was like, "I know, it's okay. I'm with you. I empathize." And so obviously, like something has sunk in, and that's a brilliant thing. I wondered because I could talk about this with you for hours and hours, but there are other themes. How about that? So we're going to have to pull into another one. Well, the thing that really stands out to me, and it really is reflected in your journey, is that leadership skills start at home. And I'd written down in my notes to talk about a bit later about how you've clearly been surrounded by people, by your parents and your grandparents, or at least one, as people who are entrepreneurial, but I think that almost doesn't do it complete justice. I think you've seen people with a great sense of autonomy in their purpose and their direction, by both of your parents having a career change during your early life, and I think that really comes out a lot in what you're saying, and a lot of what your current way of working is. But I love that there's so much in your past that is reflected in your now, that is clearly being reflected in your son. So whatever that moment was, even though again it might have felt like an awful moment at the time, clearly paying dividends.
Yeah, I think that it's worthwhile to just hone in on, right? Like, because, well, and I guess it just matters what really is important to you, but they're important to me. But again, the peace of mind thing is important to me, right? So in order for me to have peace of mind, I need to, part of that is my son is okay, right? That he is resilient enough and that he's got the tools that he needs to navigate the world with, however he is going to navigate the world, right? So he's not even in the same country as me right now. And so that's because of this work that we've done. Like, I probably would be so worried, but I've got faith that the work that we've done together and just the way that we are together is just enough to get him through, right? And then he'll learn more from his friends now. Like, it's now over to the to the city of New York and all of his schoolmates to shape the young adult person he's going to become. So it's some point. I do think that it starts at home, and so probably with yourself first, and then the external expression of your leadership begins at home.
The next theme is personal and holistic approach. So the first thing I want to ask you is not a stock question. It's something that's been coming up for me a lot during the course of our conversation. So peace of mind and heart. One of the things that I actively manage in myself is because I also have a need for a peace of mind, peace of heart. And to me, that translates into immediate action. And sometimes immediate action is not the best course of action, right? So there's a kind of balancing between your own selfish desire to have peace of mind and heart versus what the best kind of strategic play is for that moment. And just to give you an example, if someone drops an email out to you, right, and it really upsets you or it's annoying, my response is like, bam, like get in there right now and put this to bed kind of thing. But it may not be the right approach. So I wonder, with your kind of core mantra as being peace of mind and heart, how do you balance the selfish desire for you to feel at peace versus externally what is best, or objectively what is best for the situation?
Oh, that's a good one. I'll just go based off of what I've done in the past that seemingly have warranted positive results. I don't really feel like I've got any significantly tarnished relationships or things like that. But there are some moments where I immediately respond to email. Like, I'll use your example that you provided because it's a good one because it happens a lot. Someone will send an email and they're really, really upset about something and they've got a whole list of stuff. If it's not something that I can read twice really quickly, I'm like, okay, I'm going to need a beat, which means I'm going to reply to that email and I'm going to say, I am acknowledging the receipt of this email, but I'd like to give it the due diligence that it deserves. So I will spend some time really looking into this, and I will find some time to, for us to discuss further. And that tends to go very well. Like, a lot of the times when you get like a crazy email that's like so long, I'm like, do you want to just meet? Like, it's those scenarios where, like, those memes where it's like, oh, this meeting could have been an email. No, sometimes an email has to be a meeting, right? Because if you don't have like that at least verbal connection with somebody, to hear their tone, to hear like what else might be happening. Are they pulling in other people? Like, will they go on camera? Like, all of those things. Yeah, I would say I tend to ensure that there is some sort of response, because as much as I'd like to have my peace of mind, if the people who I'm working with, if they don't have peace of mind, they're going to do whatever it takes to disrupt me. Like, just full stop, right? So managing the mental and emotional space of my clients is not, I would say, okay, so this is going to be a boundary discussion, but I take it on as a bit of my responsibility, where like, I'm not responsible for their whole life, but at least in the interaction that I have with them, they're going to be at peace, or they're going to have some comfort that, it's being heard, it's being actioned, and that I will be, asking them like, what would be the best outcome for you, right? And I'll tell you what the best outcome for me will be, and maybe we'll meet in the middle, or maybe I'll just do exactly what you want, but at least tell me what you need to make this right. I find that tends to work pretty well. There are some moments where it's like, if it's out of nowhere, a lot of the times I don't really get shook, but sometimes I get shook and I'm like, whoa, like, how dare this person? Like, where are they coming from? I'm feeling attacked. Like, I don't normally feel that way, but sometimes I do, right? Like, it's like, holy smokes, I'm actually feeling like a lot of anger and resentment towards this person for coming at me like this. Like, what the hell? Like, that's rude. How dare you, kind of thing. Those are the moments where I don't respond right away. Or if I do respond, depending on it, it'd be like, yeah, it sounds like you're really upset and I'm just going to need a minute. Usually I ask for a minute. Or I say like, could you please explain a little bit more? Or this was my thought in the moment, right? As a bit of an explanation, but also as a bit of understanding, the intent was not that, like, I promise you that, but it was received the way that you received it, and I'm responsible for that. So I need a minute to realize what I created. So I'm really sorry. Like, a lot of the time I will just like say the sorry, but like, it is funny though. Like, sometimes it's like, you just rocked my world and I don't know what the purpose of that was. Like, why are you doing that? Like, was it really that important to you to like just shake me up like that? That's rude. But I try to also have a sense of humor about it too, and just be like, okay, well, there's going to be a lesson here, and then like, let's move past it. Like, this is your ego bruised. Like, what's more important to you in this moment?
I kind of wanted to call back to, you were mentioning before about feeling some sort of responsibility for your client's emotions, and how maybe that's not your responsibility really. And I think, yes, it's not my opinion is that it's not the consultant's responsibility of how the client feels. But one of the things that really changed the way that I do my job effectively is the circles of influence, so control and influence. Have you heard of this before? Where
Yes.
Control is in the center, that's the bullseye, right? And like kind of the exercise is like, where do you, that task or whatever it is you're working on, do you have control over it? Do you have influence on it? And if you don't have either, then it's just drop it.
You gotta
it's
let
nothing
it
to
go.
do with you. Yeah. And letting it go is a whole other podcast, I think. But at least like, but at least the whole part about you don't control your client's emotions, but you for sure influence them. And I really like how you talked. You said, "Hang on a minute, I'm feeling attacked." As the person responding to the stimulus, I guess, and what's happening around you. And I think there's a lot to be said as a consultant to have that presence of mind, to not get drawn in, because I think, and this is one of the things that I think about very, very frequently, because I am someone who's quick to anger. My emotion runs very close to the surface, kind of thing with a lot of things, and so I do a lot of work to pull that back, as we need to do, right, as consultants. I just got distracted by the snow outside. It's very heavy, and I thought, oh, maybe I need to go and pick up my child, and I don't. It's fine. This is actually, we're kind of developing like a little bit of a process here, I think, actually, which is assessing, is this within your control? Are you able to influence it? Yes or no? And then there's the part of the self-reflection, which is, I'm feeling attacked. Like, how am I feeling about this moment? And it might be that you can't control the emotion on their side, but it might be that, or it almost certainly is, that you are the person who chooses the next step. And some people's choices lead to regaining control and dominating the situation. Some people's choices lead to just shutting down and just be like, well, I need to get out of here as quickly as possible, and we'll address this another time. And I think that there's something in the middle, which is what you alluded to a bit earlier, or maybe what we spoke quite explicitly about earlier, which is taking that moment in that room to address what's going on in the room and to unclog the pipes or loosen the tension, and I think that is for sure a skill in itself. And I wonder if we just talk about that for a second.
Yeah, I think that there is. I think that like what you brought up about the control and the influence thing, I think is really huge, right? Because sometimes it's, what can I do? Is it within me? And then within this situation and within that person, right? So there is actually a lot. Like for somebody who, I like control. I like to think that I make a difference. So there's always something that I feel like I gotta do. So for people who are like that, this type of framework would be really good, because then that helps you understand what is that next best action that is required in this moment. And yeah, the emotional intelligence and emotional regulation that is required of a consultant, you have to be superior and steadfast, a rock. Like, these things will wash over you. These words, attacks will wash over you, but you have to rise above them and or be steadfast in your, in resolute in who you are as a person, why you're here, what your responsibility was in that moment to, like, what created this? Is it actually me? Was it something that I did? Or was it a choice that I made that unintentionally resulted in this kind of experience? And it takes a lot of courage and practice to do that, like on a regular basis. And yeah, like there are some days where it's like you feel like you're a punching bag, but then there are also some days where it's like, how come I haven't had any kind of issues in like the last year? Like, what is that? Like, am I not pushing my boundaries enough? Like, or am I not like trying difficult things? Like, how come it feels like everything is so harmonious? And it's likely because of the choices that you made earlier on in the relationship, or, right? Like, things happened where you were more intentional about your responses. So I feel like it is a practice, right? Of that, asking those questions in the moment, getting to the right next step faster.
Let's move on to the next theme, which is leadership and values. I guess I've got an anticipation here that, like we said a bit earlier, you've been surrounded by a lot of self-starting people and entrepreneurial people. I guess when you said that you started your own business and it happily coincided with a need at your current employer, or your then employer, and then you got some clients, and it sounds like that was a part of your life when a lot of it was about Leanne, right?
Yeah.
Like Leanne was like the main character, and rightly should be. But maybe more so than it is now. I guess when you think back to your time there starting as a leader, how do you think your leadership style has changed since that moment in your career?
Yeah, owning a business was probably my most rewarding experience that I've had. And again, I think that I would say that the number one thing is relationships. And maybe that's part of the reason why maybe recently things have been very harmonious for me in my business interactions. And I think it's because I prioritize the relationship and like what does the interaction require us to have? Like, what are the needs of the other person? What's my purpose and things like that. So I guess all of that to say, the number one thing that would never change is that, relationship is the number one thing. So what has changed from a leadership style perspective, actually, and maybe I don't know if anything's really changed. I would just say that because in my role now, with all of the consultants that I work with and partner with on projects, I still treat them as if they were my employees, it's just more of a respect thing. Like, what is it that you need right now that I might have control or influence over, right? So I think, that control and influence thing, that was huge. You unlocked something for me by saying that, so thank you. Because we all have control and influence, regardless of what role we have in our positions and in our companies and whatever it is. It's like, again, at home, right? Like, if we're practicing our leadership at home, there's a title, like I'm a mom, but like at the end of the day, there's really no hierarchy kind of thing. And there's no designated person that's like, you are the person that's making all the rules. Although in some households that might be not true, but, right. So there are certain things that I would say that I learned more being an entrepreneur, and that was the concept of letting people do what they think is best. And you can give all the advice in the world and you can coach them all you want, but at the end of the day, they've got their own flair, they've got their own way. And sometimes you just got to get out of their way and just be like, okay, I trust you. Here's the definition of done. However, how you get there, it's up to you. Just don't make a mess along the way.
Do you have, because I think this is the core, like, fork in the road for every leader, and certainly I'm similar to yourself by the sounds of things. I like a great deal of autonomy. I like to just, someone give me something to do and I'll just go and do it and it will be good. And if it's not, I'll come back and I'll say, hey, this is not going well. I need some help. I think that there's plenty of experiences in my career where there are leaders that have done that, leaders that have just said, like, this is the definition of done, or this is the purpose of what you're doing, or whatever it is, giving you that guide rail, and then you just shoot for it, and then it lands. And then there's other leaders who I've worked with who are unable to let go of the steering wheel. How have you kind of arrived at this moment where you kind of have accepted that it might not be exactly what you're looking for, but it might achieve the goal? Do you kind of enter those agreements with people prepared for it all to just go wrong, and you're sat there being anxious, just like, oh my God, they're going to do a terrible job? Or do you just like, bam, that's yours, and you off you go? Like, what's happening in your mind when you give that freedom?
It's a really good question, because that's something that I constantly work on. And it just depends on who the person is, right? Like, not everybody can take complete ownership of a task. They either lack the self-confidence, or, they might not have had a similar upbringing, so they've never been practicing it. Like, so for example, there could be a scenario where like someone's being asked to lead a workshop, but they never had a dad who would ask their child, like themselves, to call their aunt to say, hey, what's for dinner, right? So if they were raised to never speak, they're never going to have any idea of how to run a workshop. So is that really the right thing to ask of that person, right? Like, is there another role? So I've always thought, like, if the person is right, a right person for this job, but not necessarily for the tasks outlined here, there could be other tasks that they could do instead, because there's a lot that can be done. Like, but if we really like this person and we know that she brings or he brings magic to every single project, like, this is how she does it or he does it, let's bring them in a different capacity. There's I guess, accommodation, and then there's actually a skill gap. So just knowing, I guess that would be the discernment that you would need to uncover. And that's the part that's hard, because I found what's hard as a leader is that my heart is so attached to the person. I build almost like too strong of a connection. And then if it just doesn't work, I take it as a personal failure, right? Like, this isn't working. I'm just like so sorry. And then when you have to let go of that person, it's just like, oh God. But if you don't, then it's actually harmful for that person and for the rest of the team, right? So you kind of have to, right, like, play those different various levels. And so the expectation, so we did some leadership training when I was at Salesforce, and it really is about, like, does the person really know what the job is? And is there really a skill gap? Because if there really is, then either are we going to work to close it, or you have no intention of actually knowing that, like, learning this skill. And I do want to also mention, like, from a mentorship, leadership perspective, there is a continuous learning attitude that a consultant must have, or I would think anybody, if they're looking to have any kind of career, continuous learning in all areas of your life is mandatory. And so I would say, if there's no desire to learn and there's no desire to improve the skill set, right? Like, ultimately, we're all looking to master a skill. Like, if there's no desire to do that, then, we might have to talk about a different direction for you. But generally speaking, if you've got those attributes, the job itself can be trained. It's that personality characteristics of, determination, resilience, resourcefulness, the figuring it out, I did this on my first try. I'm happy to redo it again because I'm comfortable with repetition of work, right? Like, just continuous improvement mindset.
And it's funny because what you're talking about is something that I've been reflecting on really heavily for the past few months. And I think you summed it up beautifully by saying how much accommodation you're prepared to give people and understanding whether it's a skill gap or not. And it's like those two things. And because what I've been specifically reflecting on is exactly what you said as well, which is that, people have been raised in certain ways. They are where they are right now. And I think that in the world of work, there are people that function by looking out and seeing how much of themselves are reflected in the people around them. And I think that has led, in the worst case scenario, leads to a lot of toxic behaviors, because people who are more inclined to think that they are the best look around and see how everyone is not as good. And I think that may be how we end up in situations where leaders are unable to step away from the mic. They can't let go of the steering wheel because they see how other people are not like them, and that to them is enough to indicate that they won't do as good a job as they would. But like you said, if someone grew up in a household where they weren't allowed to speak, then one, it's amazing that they're even in a job in the first place. We don't award jobs based on how amazing it is or where they've come from. We award the jobs based on what they do. So it kind of ties back, and I've still not reached a conclusion on it, but the difference between how much you should accommodate someone and plugging skill gaps seems to be mandatory anyway. But
at what point is it the employer's responsibility to close the gaps, right? The skill gaps, right? If the employer is saying, like, as a leader, if I'm asking a person, this is the skill that we really need, could you practice it over a 6-month period of time? If you're not seeing any type of effort, that ultimately is the reason for the letting go, right? The lack of desire to improve a skill that is highly coveted in this organization, right? Like, that's ultimately what it boils down to. And just that, like, the attitude of, I don't need to do this, or this is, why are you, like that kind of, I would hope that if you're given some sort of accommodation, that you would take that as an opportunity to learn. But it could also be, I don't know, like every situation is different, and we can't just blanket statement everything, but generally speaking, I would say, sometimes a shift is required as opposed to, just waiting.
Minor correction. Yeah.
Yeah, like, because it ends up being not minor correction, it ends up being like a major correction. Like, this is actually what we need, and unfortunately everything else is, not enough. And it sucks.
Great conversation, again, around these points. Thank you so much. Let's move into the final theme, which is mentorship, guiding and being guided. Are there any, couple of standout moments where someone has either kind of outright mentored you and given you something that's just blown your mind, or has passively mentored you by demonstrating some behavior or action that you thought, wow, that's amazing, I'm going to incorporate that?
I would say I have a mentor right now. She was the woman that hired me from the temp agency. And so we've been working together either directly or indirectly for 20 years, right? So you get to know a person, and to be able to have a mentor that lasts that long, I guess you could say, is just like completely inspiring. But I would say that she's a woman who taught me everything I know about service, like B2B service, and she really knew how to deliver white glove service in a corporate environment, because we were in real estate and dealing with like $1 billion transactions, and so she knew how to put a deal package together with the utmost care and consideration to the detail, not only about that tangible thing, but also about the experience of doing the deal with her. And she was just so considerate to people and what they needed. And I found that to be such a fascinating attribute to have of a corporate leader, especially in real estate. And so I've always admired her for that. So, and she just continues to blow me away. And she's always improving, and doesn't matter how much of an expert she is, she's just always learning something new. And I find that so fascinating too.
Thank you. And we've already spoken so much about mentorship throughout the whole piece. And I would really love to move on to the final theme, which is actually our conclusion. So we've talked about a lot of things today. As we've reflected, or as you've reflected on those things, is there a particular moment or insight that stands out to you as especially meaningful or impactful?
Yeah, I would say from a mentorship perspective, relationships matter. So building a connection, really understanding a person is the most important thing about mentorship. If delivering it, like being a mentor and then being a mentee. So know that like your role in the relationship and then the other person's role in the relationship, I think it's really clear. The control and influence I thought was just so profound. I think that I want to use that as like a solid framework going forward. Knowing what you can control and what you can influence within yourself and then with others, and then whatever you can't, just you got to let it go. Like this all contributes to that peace of mind and heart, and just keep having good intentions, I think is what it really boils down to, and open communication on what really is happening. Yeah. Oh, and then I think the last one I would say is like the emotional resilience, I think is a skill set that will be highly coveted in leaders over like the next period of time. I think it's a really important skill set to have.
And we've also spoken about some very specific things, some specific moments, and lots of ambiguous ideas and thoughts. Has this conversation shed any new light or new perspectives on those experiences?
I would say that just searching for those moments of, I guess they call it glimmer now, like instead of trigger moments, it's those glimmer moments. Start searching more for that in your life. Like so often, or I mean, I guess recently with all of the, I guess, therapy type of things, like it's managing the triggers. But now it's about, okay, so if we've reached a certain level where I'm now very aware of my triggers and how I respond and how I feel in those moments, and I have a strategy on how to mitigate against it. Now it's about creating these glimmer moments, right? So instead of reducing something, I want to start creating something like more joy, more fun, more excitement, more peace, more whatever it is, right? So the shift is changing for me, and I would say I'm excited about it, because instead of trying to like reduce pain, it's about creating more joy. And I would say, I'm looking forward to what's coming.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Mentor Collective podcast. If you enjoyed it, you're welcome to subscribe. You're also welcome to go to our website, thementorcollective.net, to find out about the other good work we do in mentorship. Wherever you are, I hope you have a great rest of your day.